Thank you very much, and I welcome questions, comments, attacks, whatever. Thank you.
I'll ask Mr. Kaiser to respond. Yes.
My name is Hugh Grindstaff.
Would it be simpler just to have a constitutional amendment to change terms for the House of Representatives to 4 years, 3 terms each, or 4 terms each? Because right now, all the congressman's doing is basically campaigning, and his staff is taking care of business. And it doesn't seem to me 2 years in today's way of life is just too short a term.
Interesting question. We could spend the rest of the evening thinking up nifty constitutional amendments that would help us out here. Personally, I'd like one that would overrule a Supreme Court decision in 1975 called Buckley v. Vallejo, which held, in effect, that spending money was an exercise of free speech, spending money in campaigns, which I think was wrong-headed and unfortunate. Your idea, I think, doesn't solve the big problems. I couldn't argue with you that 2 years is an awful brief period now, and I couldn't argue with you that staff hasn't become extremely important on Capitol Hill, not only for the reason you suggest, but I'm not sure we'd be in a vastly better situation if your amendment were passed. I think it's important to recognize how hard it is now to amend the Constitution. There's been no amendment for a long time. It doesn't mean it'll never happen again, but it won't be easy.
I would like to add
Please.
a comment to what Mr. Kaiser just said. As one who served for 22 years in the House of Representatives.
11 elections.
11 elections. I lost the first 2. It's hard work running every 2 years. And one learns serving in the House of Representatives about the issues and about how to deal with them, and to impose, therefore, in my judgment, an arbitrary limit on the number of terms one may serve is unwise, because you limit the knowledge of the legislators. I could go on, but I'm a child of the House and not the Senate.
Hi, Susan Levine. I wanted to say thank you very much. I really look forward to reading your book. I wish there were more journalists and people with your integrity who are outside of the system who would write about it, because there's so much out there. And I don't know if you're familiar with opensecrets.org,
yes.
But I think the internet, as it exists, as long as it exists, is allowing for more information to get out there. So I first want to say thank you. But then I'm watching this whole, and Tom Daschle's wife is a lobbyist. The families and lovers of these people become lobbyists. Their children, work in lobby firms. But then you've got something like the trial lawyers trying to pass a $1.6 billion tax credit, hidden in some bill coming up without, it being. How is there any way to stop this hemorrhaging of money in the system when, it used to just be having an oar in the water? It seems like so many of these organizations on both sides of the aisle not just have oars, but like you said, write the legislation themselves. It just seems so incestuous. And the journalists, you're an exception perhaps, but the journalists I don't think are doing their job. In the sense that I will read an article by one journalist and then I'll look at their Facebook page and they're friends with all these political operatives on one side of the party or the other. So it sort of makes me wonder.
Really? I didn't know that.
Sorry.
I'm on Facebook, but I have no political friends that I know of. It's an interesting phenomenon because people try to befriend you, this, on Facebook, who you never heard of. Well, thank you for that. This is a, I mean, you have in a different way than I did spoken to my core thesis here, which is that we're dealing with a culture. It's not as though there's a particular, there's a bad actor over here and a stinky situation over here. The whole thing is, this is the culture that we have now. And I'm going to give it a somewhat idiosyncratic response to you because I think it's important to keep this in mind. I'm sure you're right that many journalists aren't doing their jobs as well as they could. And I am very enthusiastic about the power of the internet. It's the Center for Public Responsiveness, is that right? That does the OpenSecrets.org. It's a wonderful outfit. I relied on it heavily in my book, and I rely on it still as a reporter all the time. There are wonderful databases now that show us who's giving to whom and who's lobbying for whom and how much they're making. The reforms passed by the Congress in 2007 when the Democrats came in are meaningfully providing a lot more information because they have to file more detail and more often, which is good. But all the transparency in the world is only useful if citizens are paying attention. And I think that one of the curses of the age, perhaps not unrelated to this culture, but in any case an important sustainer of it now, is the decline of civic involvement, the decline of civic knowledge. You read these terrifying polls of our young people who don't know what the Supreme Court is, or what the term of a member of the House is versus a member of the Senate, or the most basic kind of civics book information, in no small measure because there are very fewer civics books and many fewer school districts teaching civics. A lot of this stuff has just gone out of fashion altogether. Senator Kaufman of Delaware has just arrived. We should acknowledge his presence. Thanks, Ted. I'm often reminded of a wonderful wisecrack that Barney Frank made years ago when he was assaulted by reporters asking about some scandal in the Congress. And Barney said, let me just make one point. He said, the public is no bargain either. There's a lot of wisdom there. I mean, we can't have a good, well-functioning democracy without effective citizen participation. And good stories in the newspapers by themselves don't create that. I've lived through many, many years now of being blamed for the ills of society, often by politicians, interestingly. Going back, I remember vividly in the early years of Reagan, the liberal Democrats in Congress, this is when I was editing the Sunday Outlook section, so I actually presided over opinion mongering in the paper. And I remember one particular evening when we happened to be in the same place with 3 or 4 liberal Democratic senators, including Al Gore and Max Baucus, then more of a liberal than he is now. And they decided that the game for that evening would be to pick on me. Why aren't you standing up to Reagan? Why aren't you doing more? He said, hey guys, you're the ones with subpoena power. You're the ones who got elected to office. It's not our job, it's your job. Oh, no, you know how hard it is. It's a really interesting recurring phenomenon.
Yes.
Phil Ruppy, I was thinking about your comment that presidents tend to be followers and not leaders.
Politicians, not presidents.
Pardon?
Politicians, so yeah. Okay.
Well, let's take it another step further. Looking at something more current like the war in Iraq, to what extent did lobbying play a role in our coming into the war? Was there a lobbying of ideas? Was there a lobbying of money applied to politicians? There was also something of an effort in some of the press, I think, to get us on the road. What are the various elements of the lobbying initiative that took us into this thing?
I'm trying to remember. Oh, Chalabi. Remember Mr. Chalabi of Iraq, a Shiite politician, very interesting character, who actually lived in Washington and was a lobbyist, in effect, for a war in Iraq and won a lot of allies on both sides of the aisle. Was very persuasive and eloquent, and we now know dead wrong in his prognosis about what happened if we get dumped Saddam Hussein. I don't think it would be accurate to describe the war in Iraq as the fruits of a lobbying campaign, but lobbying campaigns are now endemic. They're a part of our daily lives in every realm, and there certainly were lobbying campaigns. There was a whole group of Friends of Israel who were very interested in promoting the idea of taking military action to get rid of Saddam Hussein as a way to help protect Israel's interests. A legitimate intellectual proposition, in my view, but it did have the influence of a lobbying campaign, I'm sure, in some places. But I think, the decision, we know mostly from Bob Woodward's books and some other good books now that have appeared, the decision to go to war in Iraq came pretty much out of the heads of senior officials of the Bush administration who were eager and determined to do it. Now, how were their minds altered or affected earlier by various kinds of influence, I don't know. But I don't think you could fairly attribute it to outside pressure. I think they did it themselves.
Another question? Yes.
My name is Art Bushkin. Many of us who were present at the creation of the internet, or what was to become the internet, were totally wrong, and our crystal balls were cloudy. So assuming that you are better, can you put on the hat of prognosticator, and not the future of lobbying and not the future of news or newspapers, but we now have the ability of many people, not just a handful, to express a voice. What's going to happen as the voices proliferate? How will that affect the electoral process? It's lobbying of a different sort. It's democracy of a different sort. How does it all get sorted out?
Nice to see you, Art. I didn't realize, I knew that I knew you, but I didn't come up with the name. Art Bushkin was involved in a company called Interchange, right? No?
Really was president of the creation of the internet?
Yeah, but Interchange was, were you involved with Interchange that the Post was doing business with? A rival to Prodigy and CompuServe and so on?
I was the CEO of Bell Atlantic Video Services that created video on demand, which you now call Bell.
Okay, all right. Well, it's an irrelevant anecdote in any case. Nice to see you. I'm not sure all the prognoses were wrong, but that's a different conversation.
That was my question.
Right.
You're smarter than the rest of us.
Which I'm not. I was intimately involved in the decision at the Washington Post when I was the managing editor to take the paper online. And what we didn't know when we did that could be the subject of a long book, because we particularly didn't understand the ethos that everything had to be free, which has really killed us in an interesting way. But that's another subject. You are right. The latest round of transformation, technological transformation in the human condition, offers the promise of an entirely different arrangements between the populace at large and the powerful. Barack Obama is our president in part because of this. One of the, you're talking about money in politics, the Obama campaign for president spent just shy, I say this number with difficulty, just shy of $800 million. A staggering amount, vastly greater than ever spent before in a campaign. But the most interesting fact, arguably, about that is that $400 million of it came in small donations made on the internet. And now every politician knows that there's this new possibility, this new opportunity to raise money directly and to create enthusiasm, to create followings, to create groups that will help you out in getting elected and so on, without any need to depend on political bosses or established media outlets or any of the traditional